everyone. I'm Pallas-Amenah, a screenwriter that's currently based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm here with Creative Speak today to talk with you guys about creatives abroad. The sections I'll be covering are working abroad, studying abroad, and just general leisure and exploration. Me personally, first time I went abroad was during my undergraduate career as a junior. And ever since then, I've just found so much value from learning from different cultures and living in different countries, and just being able to explore my art in those different places. I feel like it's really allowed me to express myself in ways that I couldn't have experienced if I had limited myself to just staying in the United States. So I hope that this presentation inspires you all to take that leap and go abroad. I'll also be providing resources for how you can do that. So let's start with the presentation. First, a little bit about me and my career. Like I said, I'm a screenwriter, and I mainly focus on character-driven narratives in the drama, dystopian, and fantasy spheres. And a lot of my writing is geared towards a young adult audience. I have aspirations to write for network television. A bit of my education background: I just graduated with my master's in film from the University of Kent, and that's a UK university, but I attended their campus in Paris. A lot of people find that confusing, but the school is based in England, and then they had a campus in Paris where I went to school. My undergraduate degree came from Ithaca College in upstate New York, and that was in screenwriting. I also earned a certificate in cinema studies from the University of Southern California. I've worked on projects with DreamWorks Animation and Working Title Films in Los Angeles. I know a lot of you know DreamWorks, but if you don't know Working Title, they helped to make Cats. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's what they did. I also worked with Broadcaster Media in Barcelona, Spain. Broadcaster is a management company that works mainly in advertising, and I served as an assistant to the head of post-production as well as a digital journalist. And most recently, I worked with the ECU Film Festival in Paris, France, as an assistant to the head of media literacy and as a journalist. So as you can see, a lot of my career has been outside of the United States, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how I did that and how you can do it too. So the first thing I wanted to cover is why bring your creativity abroad. It sounds like a big leap, and a lot of people may not want to make the effort to do it, which is totally understandable because it can be expensive if you don't know what you're doing. But I'm hoping to cover some reasons of why it might be worth it. There's an interesting study that was published by the American Psychological Association that talks about how experiencing different cultures in different countries can actually influence your creativity, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because if you're seeing new things and learning new things, of course, it's going to inspire what you write, what you film, what you paint. So the first reason that I have for why you should try to bring your creativity abroad is that it's a chance to get away from the familiar and stepping outside of what you know. It's kind of that cliche phrase, step out of your comfort zone. Like I stated earlier, the first time I ever left the country was my junior year of college as an undergraduate. I went to Paris for a study abroad semester without any of my friends from school. So I completely was like starting over. It was like freshman year orientation all over again. It was really nerve-wracking, and it was I'm a very insecure person a lot. I'm very shy as well, but this experience just completely changed my outlook on being able to step outside of my own comfort zone and kind of face my insecurities and face the fact that I don't have to limit myself. I always used to think that going abroad was only for a particular group of people, and by that I mean rich people. But for me, studying abroad gave me an opportunity to kind of put myself in a position where I never thought I could be. Studying abroad for me kind of gave me it gave me the tools to be able to attain resources that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So just that first point, just stepping away from the familiar, it really influenced my writing as well, because I kind of was able to realize that I can do the things that I probably thought that I couldn't before. The second reasoning, studying or living in a place relevant to your art. I've always wanted to visit Paris, especially because you have so many Black Americans that moved there to kind of get away from the racism that they faced in America. And you know, France isn't, it's not like France doesn't have its own racism, but for Black Americans especially, there's a bit of a respite from that. You know, like Josephine Baker, Jacob Baldwin, it kind of gave them a space to be who they wanted to be. So that's kind of going back to that first place, is stepping away from the familiar. They were able to attain resources. They were able to explore their creativity in a way that they weren't able to in the US, not only because they weren't allowed to because of the racist systems there, but because of societal expectations of what society thought they could attain, and they didn't face that in Paris. Also, just Paris was just such, Paris is such a hub for art and culture. So for me, as a screenwriter, I felt that coming to Paris would allow me to explore that aspect of the city, and I was right. I think that Paris itself, especially for film, is just such a great city to live in and kind of explore. And I was able to work on my writing and my creativity while being inspired by all of those American greats that came to France for that very same reason. My third point is about returning and seeing the familiar with fresh eyes. There was a time when I thought I would stay in Paris forever, but then after a year and a half of living there, I really missed home. But even upon returning to the US, I feel like I took a bit of Paris with me, because I still like to sit in cafes outside just for hours on end, reading and writing. That's one really big thing that I loved about French culture, is that you can go to a cafe, buy one coffee, and sit there for 3 hours just writing. So that's definitely something that I was able to take back to the US with me, is just being able to sit and take the time to write, because that's something that I really enjoyed doing in Paris. So this fourth point kind of relates to the third one, learning new techniques not found back home. I think that, well, of course, any place that you go, you're going to experience something a little different than what you would have in your home country. For me, the first time I went abroad as an undergrad, I took a human rights course. And the woman there, she's a Black woman, but from America, but moved to Paris after she married her husband there. And she just taught me so much about human rights in France. And I was able to see it was just interesting to see the differences in how people are treated in France versus the United States, especially Black people in general. And that actually inspired one of my first feature films that I wrote, called At Its Worst. It's a psychological thriller that's about just kind of the human condition. And that was inspired by a human rights course, which doesn't really have anything to do with film or writing, but because I went to Paris and because I took that course, was able to gain that news perspective from my professor, it inspired that piece of writing. And it actually later won an award in the Screencraft horror competition in 2019. And the fifth point's kind of obvious, but cultural immersion. In terms of living abroad, I've lived in Barcelona and in Paris. Barcelona, I was there for 6 months, and Paris, I was there for first 5 months during my undergraduate career, and then later as a graduate student, I was there for a year and a half. So living in those two different places, they're actually very different. Barcelona, I found, was a lot more laid back and slow moving. Paris is as well, but there's also just this element of city life that I didn't experience in Barcelona. But I think the similarity between those two was just how different it is from the American culture of, you live to work. Whereas in Barcelona and in Paris, it was more you work to live. Barcelona, you eat dinner at like 10:30 p.m. In Paris, like I mentioned before, you can sit for hours just talking during a meal without thinking about having to rush off to the next event. And I think those two aspects of Spanish and French culture have been brought back with me to the US. I'm trying to live as a much slower person now and not putting so much stress on myself in terms of work, and just taking the time to write and just taking the time to read or taking the time to watch Netflix. It's just, if I hadn't have gone abroad, I don't think I would have been influenced in the same way as I am now to really take the time for myself and slow down, just because that's not something that you often see in America. It is not something that a lot of Americans do. So that's just something I'm really grateful for. So those are just 5 things that I personally experienced from being able to work and live abroad during my career as a student. And hopefully I'll be able to do that now that I'm a professional in the real world. But those are just 5 points that I find really influence my creativity. So now I'm actually hoping to provide you guys with some insight and resources to actually go abroad. As I mentioned before, it can be expensive if you don't know what you're doing. I know I didn't know what I was doing, and I was really lucky to be able to afford it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I did that. So studying abroad as an undergraduate. So as I mentioned before, the first time I went abroad was in 2018 as a junior in college. And that was at Ithaca College in upstate New York. I was a screenwriting student at the Roy H. Park School of Communications. The program that I went abroad with is called CEA, and they were absolutely amazing. I think I only found them because I just haphazardly Googled study abroad programs, and my study abroad advisor at school was just so helpful with helping me to navigate the finances and everything like that. I think the most useful thing with CAA is that they offer to allow students to go abroad in conjunction with their university. So basically that means that any financial aid that I was receiving from Ithaca College would transfer over to my CEA program. And luckily for me, my tuition was fully covered at Ithaca with scholarships. And so I was able to go abroad without having to pay tuition, which was a huge blessing. I only paid room and board to go abroad. And in general, universities outside of the United States are already less expensive. So we actually ended up saving money by me going abroad, which I would have never thought that was possible, because, you know, there's this preconceived notion that kids that go abroad, they have money. I did not, but we ended up saving money by going abroad. So I was like, wow, this is great. Going abroad is fun. So yeah, the program again was called CEA, and it was the Paris program that I went with in 2018. Some things to know about studying abroad as an undergraduate. You know, there's opportunities to travel as well, but you do kind of have to put your mind to why you're going abroad, especially if it's because you want to advance your career. So the first point, how to widen your contacts. There's a lot of opportunities to meet different types of people when you go abroad, because everybody is in a broad program. They're not all from the United States. In my undergraduate abroad program, I had people from India, people from Pakistan, people from the UK, people from Spain. And those are people that I probably would have never met had I just stayed in the United States. And they've been, like, the friends that I made abroad from different places, from different backgrounds, have been extremely helpful in terms of my career. One, like I mentioned before, the professor that I had as an undergraduate who taught the human rights course, she inspired me to write my feature film that won an award. She also was the person that I was able to reach out to in order to get an internship at DreamWorks when I went to Los Angeles. Because she had contacts there from when she used to live in the United States. So I would have never met her, probably would have had a harder time of getting those opportunities had I not gone abroad. There's also tons of opportunities to find a niche. So before I went abroad as an undergraduate, I was unsure if I wanted to write for television or for feature films. But after going abroad and taking a few courses in Paris and then visiting this museum that they have called Cinematheque, And they have just this huge catalog of all of these films that were written by French directors and writers dating back to like the 1920s or early 1900s. And then I saw like, I can't remember the name of the show now, but it was one of those older shows, but it was written by a Black woman who was from America. And they had these old clips of the show, and they also had old catalogs of the scripts that she wrote, like the roughs of the scripts that she wrote. And I was like, wow, this person came from America to Paris and wrote a show in French that became super famous. French people still talk about it, but I'd never heard about it in the United States. So it was really cool to see how she was able to leave America and come to Paris and, follow her dreams. And that's kind of when I decided I want to write for television. So that was kind of the process of me finding my niche and realizing that I wanted to write for TV, specifically for kids, because I've just, growing up as a kid, I always loved to read, and I wanted to inspire kids in the same way. The last point, study abroad opportunities, funding, and programs. So as I mentioned, with CEA, it's really useful to be able to go abroad when you're in conjunction with your university to make sure that any funds that you're receiving from your undergraduate school can transfer over to a study abroad program. At the end of this presentation, I'll also provide a link where I have a whole catalog of different scholarships that you can apply to go abroad, as well as different program options. So that's something that I'll provide at the end of this presentation. So the next point, higher education abroad and career impact. So I went abroad as an undergraduate, but then I also went to get my master's abroad in Paris again because I loved it so much. So I'll talk a little bit about how that experience has aided me in my career now that I've graduated with my master's degree. So some things to know, applying to grad school is a lot like applying to college. Surprise. But if you're going abroad for grad school, there's also things to consider, like a visa and laws that are different from the United States, as well as cultural differences. I know I experienced a lot of culture shock the first time I came to Paris. And, if you haven't been abroad before, that can be a pretty trying experience, especially when you're doing it for school, which is already really stressful. So just some things to consider when you're applying for grad school abroad, because this time, unlike with study abroad in undergraduate, you're not able to have the resource of a study abroad advisor or a financial aid advisor that you would have if you were a student in an undergraduate university. You're now doing it on your own. So some advice that I would give is really doing your research on scholarships and funding, because you don't want to just throw that out the window just because you no longer have professional guidance. It can be really useful to look up the government of that country and see if they have scholarships for international students. Sometimes even the United States will have scholarships or grants that you can apply to in order to go abroad for a specific major. I know when I applied for the University of Kent, that's the university I went to for my master's, I was able to get a scholarship as an international student studying film. And all I had to do to enter that was to submit one of my scripts. And then I wrote like a 1-page essay. And I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't have looked it up. So really make sure that you're not just tossing the idea out the window because you think, oh, it's too expensive. There are always options and aids for you. And it's really useful to look into that. The last point is about whether or not graduate school fits into your timeline. I know that when I was thinking of applying to grad school, I was unsure if I should, because I was wondering maybe I should just move out to LA and start my career. I don't know if I want to spend my time in another year and a half of school. At the time, I was working in Barcelona at Broadcasting Media, and it was a temporary position that was going to end at the end of the summer. And I was considering moving back home or applying to grad schools abroad because I had just loved working abroad and I wanted to see if I could continue that journey through an educational environment. For me, that worked perfectly because the University of Kent master's program was only a year, and the schedule was like 2 courses a week. Like the semester was 2 courses, and then you had the class, I think, 3 times a week. So I was only going to class 3 days. And the rest of my time, I could spend writing, I could spend exploring the city, I could spend working. So that's why it fit for me, but it won't fit for everyone, but it's just something to consider. I think one of the most beneficial things that came for me from getting higher education abroad was just the networking, again, that I did. One of these photos here, the woman that you see me giving, the woman that you see me presenting there, her name is Dr. Mam Fatuniang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she's an Afro-French woman, and she's a filmmaker, a director, and she's produced, this was on a film that she made that actually won an award in France, one of their highest awards for French filmmakers. And I had the opportunity to present her during my university's yearly Paris Arts Festival. And so again, that's something that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't have pursued higher education abroad. And I'm still in contact with her today. We've met up multiple times. I still call her. And she's just been such a great resource during my career now that I've graduated. Working as a creative abroad. So as I mentioned, I've worked in Barcelona, and I also worked in Paris while I was a graduate student. So I'll talk a little bit how I did that and what I found beneficial from it. So the first thing, work visas. Nobody likes applying for them, but they are necessary if you want to work abroad. Luckily for me, when I was in Barcelona, I did it in conjunction with a program. So the company that hired me paid for my work visa. So I didn't have to worry about that. And then when I was a student working in Paris as a graduate, I had a student visa. And with a student visa, you're allotted a specific number of hours that you are allowed to work. I think it qualifies for a part-time, the allotted number of hours qualifies for a part-time job. So that's useful to know that if you are interested in working abroad, it can be beneficial to go as a student, whether it's for studying abroad as an undergraduate or if you're pursuing higher education. If you are no longer interested in being a student, like you've graduated and you're like, I don't want to do that whole academic life again, then applying for a work visa will be a little bit more work and a little bit more money, but there are a lot of programs that actually offer work visas for free, and countries will basically pay you to come work in their country, whether it's remotely or if you're applying to a specific company. So it's worth looking into for that. Another thing to consider is the reliability of income. I know as a student, when I was a graduate in Paris this past year, I knew that I needed to work. I knew that I couldn't just go to school, go to classes, and that's it. I needed a job to pay for rent. And I found that the income was reliable. The positions that I had in Paris, I was with the ECU Film Festival, working as an assistant to the head of post-production and as a journalist. That income was very useful for me. And it also, the American Library in Paris was just such a great experience as well. I started there as an intern, and then they later hired me to work full-time. So I was doing that while taking classes and going to school. So it may sound like, oh, how did you do that? That sounds like a lot of work. How did you not get burnout? But again, I was only going to classes 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I could spend working. And for me, just the French system is also so different from the United States. They give you more sick days. You also get longer vacations, and then they don't work you to the ground as they do in the United States. So that's how I was able to juggle being a student and working. The income was also useful as well, and benefits too, because even as a student, I was able to get healthcare. I was able to get free doctor's appointments. I had, again, like allotted sick days, vacation time. So just that whole system really worked well for me. The third point is finding community. So when you have a job, you might think like, oh, I don't want to become friends with the people at work. But I found it was really useful to connect with the people that I worked with. So those photos there are just, you can see the community that I was a part of. But the ECU Film Festival, all the people working there were kind of my age. So we would always hang out on weekends. We would go to the gardens. We would even go out of the country sometimes and do little trips together. With the American Library in Paris, there were programs and events that we could be a part of. And it was just such a great way to immerse myself in the culture. With the ECU Film Festival, there were people from all over, but the American Library in Paris, it was mostly native English speakers. Both of those experiences were useful because with ECU, you know, I'm getting involved with people outside of from what I'm used to, like people from different places. Whereas with the American Library in Paris, it was more of a safe space for me to speak English without French people looking at me the wrong way. So two very different communities, but both very beneficial in terms of what I needed while I was abroad. And just a little bit about my postgraduate experience so far. As I mentioned, I graduated with my master's this past December, and I'm now in the process of applying to jobs. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Especially if you're interested in the entertainment industry, I hope that this can be useful to you. Just some of the tips that I might have during my journey so far. So what to expect? Applying to jobs abroad and at home. When I first moved back to the United States from Paris, I was considering applying to jobs abroad as well as jobs in the United States. After a month of considering it, I don't believe that it's in my best interest for me personally, just because, again, navigating the work visa is a little difficult. And especially since I'm no longer a student, it's a lot harder to work abroad. I could have stayed at the American Library of Paris if I wanted to, but I want to write for television. So I had to leave, which was really sad. But just the process of applying to jobs so far has been a little difficult because I'm based in Washington, D.C., and the jobs I'm applying for are mainly in Los Angeles and Atlanta, Georgia. And one thing I found is that a lot of people during the interview process want to meet you in person. And because the entertainment industry in general moves so fast, a lot of people want you to be able to come the next day. I had one person call me back for a job. And when I told him I was based in DC, but had means to move to Los Angeles, he was like, oh, we're looking for someone as early as tomorrow, even though we still have to do the interview process, which sounds a little ridiculous, but you would think of how fast the industry moves. It does make sense that they want you to physically be there. I wouldn't recommend lying and saying you are in Los Angeles when you're not. Because you don't want to be put in a position where you're wasting anyone's time. But it does pay to be honest, because afterwards he said, if we're still looking for someone in a week, I'll give you a call. And then he also offered me a position in their New York office because I'm on the East Coast. So it can work out. And just to that point, and a breakdown of the entertainment industry, it is very fast moving. So it's important to be on top of things when you're applying. As a screenwriter, I'm looking for mainly positions as an assistant in a management or production office. I don't do film production. I'm more of the writing side. So working in a mail room, if you've heard that term, is probably the best place to start if you're interested in writing. A lot of people have told me that working in a development office isn't great if you want to be a screenwriter, but I would beg to differ. I think that working in development, covering scripts, reading scripts, and recommending them to your supervisors can be really useful. One colleague of mine that I had during an internship when I was working in Los Angeles, she was in a development office, and the guy that she was working with got hired to be a writer's PA after recommending a script that, he had nothing to do with. So it can be really useful. There are definitely highs and lows to working in the industry. It can be a lot of backbreaking work. I think from my presentation, you might kind of get the idea that I don't like American work culture, and that's very true when it comes to the entertainment industry in general. I think that just how fast-paced it is, and then there's a lot of expectations to there's expectations that you're going to go above and beyond, which can be a good thing, but a lot of people will expect you to do back-breaking work for very little pay, which can be hard. So just recognize that everyone's journey will look different. Some people will move out to LA or move out to Atlanta, move out to Chicago, as soon as they graduate from a film school. But for me, that just didn't make much sense. And I've been lucky enough that I've been able to be home after graduating with my master's and applying to places from DC, instead of moving out there immediately and paying rent and paying for, paying for rent, when I could just stay home and apply for positions. So everyone's journey will look different. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're falling behind or if you're not moving as fast as your peers are, just because there are just so many options for you. There's so many options for networking, so many options for connecting with people that you've met from your undergraduate career, your graduate career, and you never know how those things are going to help you. Even just from getting my certificate degree from USC, I have connections with people that are alumni from USC, and they've been extremely useful in helping me to connect with people that are currently in the industry. So just the main point is working your connections, and in the entertainment industry in general, networking is so important. So especially if you're going abroad and you're getting those experiences to meet new people, that has been the main thing that has really helped me in terms of my career, is having a diversity of people to connect with, a diversity of people to reach out to ask for tips on where to apply, or, hey, is this position open that I saw that you were working at while I was in Barcelona? It's just been such a terrific experience and so beneficial. So I hope I've inspired you guys to go abroad, or at least try. And if you're still thinking, well, you've given me so many reasons to go abroad, but you didn't tell me how, I have some options. I have a database of abroad aid and resources. It's this link right here that you can copy and paste. And there's also resources for the film industry in general that comes from diversity initiatives and platforms and grants to apply to, as well as scholarships specifically for filmmakers. There's also a list of competitions that you can apply to as a screenwriter, and then just a general database of study abroad resources, and as well as my top recommended programs for going abroad. And if you would like to keep in touch with me on social media, that's my handle right there. I'm mainly most active on Instagram. But yeah, I'd love to chat. Giving people resources to go abroad and the means to go abroad is super important to me, because it's basically something I would have wanted when I was younger. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope that you guys can explore, step out of your comfort zones and bring your creativity abroad, because the world needs it. Bye.
Pallas, for the presentation. We appreciate you, and that was very insightful. I'm sure it will be of great help to our audience. So my first question would be, what's your work style like? What's your work style like?
My work style. You mean like my process of working?
Yes.
So as a writer, I think my writing process is very undisciplined. I've always been impressed by people that are able to sit down and dedicate an allotted amount of time to writing. I can't do that. I have to write on impulse. Sometimes even if I have a dream, I'll wake up and have to write it down. It's very haphazard, but it works for me. I think one thing that has helped me to make sure that I dedicate time to my creativity is learning how to enjoy it while doing something else. As I mentioned in my presentation, one thing that I loved about living in Paris and living in Barcelona is the slow work culture. So going out to a cafe and sitting for hours, and then maybe after the first hour, I'll think, you know what, maybe I will write a little bit. So that's really helped me to dedicate time to write. Now that I'm back in the United States, it's mainly going to Starbucks and getting a drink and writing, but whatever works. But that's kind of how my process is, very haphazard and on impulse.
Yeah, whatever works, right?
Right.
And so my second question would be, how do you keep going? How do you keep writing? What keeps you motivated with your creativity process and that whole process of writing?
I think, well, first I'll start with one thing that almost stopped me from writing or made writing more difficult. It was while I was in school and writing started to feel like work, especially since screenwriting was my major. So now it was no longer something that was just a hobby or something that I could just enjoy to do whenever I wanted. I had to write, a script by the end of the semester. I had to create a pitch Bible in 2 weeks. I had to read someone else's scripts and make notes on them. So it just started to feel like work. And so then after I graduated, or even over summer breaks, I wouldn't write as much because I was like, I'm going to write when I'm in school. Why would I write now? It's going to be like so much work. So one way that I've learned to one thing that inspired me to continue writing is reading. Like I mentioned before, I read a lot growing up. We didn't really have a television, so books were kind of my TV. And upon reading books and seeing the way that they inspired me, I'm the kind of person that reads and then starts to daydream or like imagine scenes that would happen after the book ends. And that inspired me to write, to keep writing, because I was like, I want someone to do that with something that I create. I want someone to watch my TV show or read my book and imagine what happens after. I just think that thought is so beautiful, and I would love to be able to put something like that into the world. So it's kind of cheesy, but that's kind of my motivation to keep writing and to hopefully create something that someone will take and continue.
Okay, that's beautiful. That's great. The last question would be, to point, someone who has been helpful in your career, who's mentored you. And I know you'd mentioned one person who you've been talking to. Yeah, so who could you kindly, expound on them, or somebody else who has been influential in your career?
Well, I mean, a lot of people, like peers, professors. The one person that you mentioned, my professor from when I was abroad in Paris, was very helpful, as well as just people I happened to meet because they were alums of USC or of Ithaca College that I connected with on LinkedIn, or I found through an alumni program and reached out to them and asked for advice on navigating the entertainment industry. But I think it all boils down to one person or two people, which is my mom and dad. They've just been they were kind of the people that jump-started my passion for reading, my passion for writing. And so I wouldn't be here without them, literally, but also creatively speaking. My mom always read to my brother and I growing up. My dad was always a big storyteller. And even though they are both not in the art industry, my mom's an accountant, my dad's a lawyer, both me and my brother are in the creative arts. So that speaks a lot to the way that they raised us and the way that they supported us in terms of what we wanted to do with our careers. So I would say my mom and dad.
Okay, that's so beautiful. They raised you right. Yeah, that's all. That's the segment of questions. I think we're done.